A narcissist wants you to believe that your leaving didn't affect them at all, that they're fine, even happier without you. They want you to think you were never anything special, just one of many people who came and went in their life. And to make you believe that illusion, they'll construct a carefully curated performance, icy silence, calculated indifference, and images of a perfect life displayed for the world to see. But pause for a moment. If they truly weren't affected, why would they work so hard to prove it? Because here's the truth. When you truly walk away and don't look back, a silent collapse begins inside them. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep, intense, and irreversible. When you leave a narcissist, you don't just walk away from someone who loved you in their distorted way. You take away the mirror they need to survive. Without you, the source of attention, admiration, and emotional reactions, they lose the foundation they use to define themselves. And for a narcissist, that's not just pain, that's an ego crisis. Still, you won't see them fall apart right away. There won't be public tears, no desperate pleading. Narcissists don't explode, they fracture layer by layer from the inside. First comes denial, then anger, then panic, then the frantic attempt to replace you with someone else to patch the cracking ego. But when the new supply fails, when the emptiness remains, they're forced to confront what they fear most. No one believes in the false self they've built their entire life around. And here's the greatest paradox of all. While they try to rewrite the story, painting you as difficult, overly emotional, unlovable, you are the strong one. You're the one capable of walking away, while they remain trapped inside the very false structure you once saw through. When they believed they controlled you, it is now your silence, your refusal to return, your lack of need for closure that forces them to face their deepest fear. And in today's video, we're diving into the 6 psychological stages of that collapse, each mask falling away, each fragment of ego breaking down, so you can finally understand why leaving wasn't the weakest thing you ever did, it was the strongest. And it is from that exact moment when you walk away without looking back that a familiar internal sequence is set into motion. Stage 1: denial. For a narcissist, abandonment is never processed as a reality to be faced, but as a threat that must be immediately distorted. They do not ask themselves, "What did I do wrong?" They do not pause to reflect on consequences, nor do they sit with loss in any honest or grounded way. Instead, the ego's survival reflex activates instantly: denial. Within their psychological structure, no one is strong enough to truly leave them. If it happens, it must be temporary, emotional, or strategic. As a result, their first reaction is not grief, but illusion maintenance. They tell themselves this is just a phase, that you are testing them, that you will return as you always have. And then, they wait not with vulnerability, but with quiet arrogance, rooted in the belief that control still exists. During this stage, they perform normalcy, smiling in public, socializing, posting carefully curated images that suggest confidence and success. Not because they feel genuine joy, but because they need to see, and need the world to see, that they have not truly lost you. Denial functions as emotional anesthesia, delaying reality so the ego can breathe and reassemble its defenses. Yet each day you do not respond, do not return, do not play your former role, that anesthetic weakens. Every day becomes a thin blade cutting into the illusion of certainty. They begin monitoring your presence in silence, checking your social media more frequently, scanning for any sign that you still care. When they find nothing, or worse, when they see your calm and stability, denial shifts from belief to desperate defense. Vague messages appear, half-formed memories, casual check-ins, not meant to reconnect but to test. They need to know if you still react, if you are still within reach. If you reply, even minimally, denial is extended. If you remain silent, the system begins to fracture. To protect themselves, they construct an alternate narrative for others. You are unstable, overly emotional, difficult. They are the rational one, abandoned without cause. This is not about sympathy, but self-preservation, because admitting you left due to manipulation or emotional absence would shatter the entire ego structure they depend on. Denial delays withdrawal, but no anesthesia lasts forever. And when it wears off, your silence becomes the mirror they despise most, reflecting a single, unavoidable truth: they have lost control. And when the final layer of denial begins to fracture, when self-soothing narratives lose their grip, a different force emerges, volatile, chaotic, and uncontrollable. Stage 2, rage and panic. This is the moment when the narcissist can no longer convince themselves that everything remains under control. Your silence, once dismissed as temporary, now becomes an existential threat, not because they miss you in a loving sense, but because they are confronted with an intolerable possibility: you no longer need them. For an ego structure built on reflection and dominance, this is not mere pain, it is a survival alarm. Rage surfaces as a defensive reflex, yet it bears no resemblance to healthy anger. It is a toxic fusion of humiliation and power loss. In the narcissist's inner world, you did not simply leave, you challenged their central position. And when power is challenged, they strike back. Messages take on an attacking tone: sarcasm, devaluation, or cold declarations that they have found someone better. These words are not sent to reconnect or resolve, they are bait, designed to provoke. They need a response of any kind, because a response confirms influence. But when you do not react, rage without release mutates into internal chaos. At this stage, escalation is common: flaunting a new relationship, posting exaggerated displays of happiness, or orchestrating chance encounters. This is not love, it is weaponry. The new person is not a partner but a prop, deployed to incite jealousy and pull you back into orbit. What makes this phase particularly dangerous is the coexistence of opposing impulses. They want to hurt you, yet they want you to return. They crave jealousy, but if you came back, the old control game would immediately resume. There is no path to healing here, because the core motive is not connection, but control. When these tactics fail, when you remain unshaken, panic begins to surface. This panic is often quiet but deeply toxic, a disorientation born from the inability to predict you. You no longer behave as the ideal supply. You are no longer manipulable through tantrums or indifference. Control shifts to indirect means: smear campaigns, distorted narratives aimed at shaping how others perceive you. The goal is not emotional release, but power restoration. They cannot tolerate the idea that you might thrive independently, so they attempt to diminish you externally. Occasionally, they may adopt the mask of remorse, playing the repentant figure to evoke your empathy. This is not genuine accountability, but another strategic loop. The paradox of this stage is the immense energy invested in appearing unaffected. Those who truly do not care do not need to prove it. The effort to erase you is the clearest evidence of your presence in their mind. Rage persists only as long as they believe you might still react. When every provocation fails, the volatile energy depletes, giving way to something far more terrifying for them: emptiness. And that emptiness propels them into the next phase, seeking replacement. And when rage no longer has the strength to mask fear, when panic exhausts its destructive momentum, the narcissist is forced into a different survival strategy, quieter, but far more dangerous. Stage 3: replacement and ego reconstruction. This is the moment when anger recedes, revealing a cold, hollow space beneath, a void that cannot be soothed by justification, intimidation, or performance. For a psychologically healthy person, the emptiness after a breakup becomes a space for grief, reflection, and healing. For a narcissist, emptiness signals threat, because without reflection, the false self begins to destabilize. And lacking a stable inner identity, they cannot remain alone with themselves, so they fill the space, quickly, impulsively, without discernment. Seeking a replacement is not an emotional choice, it is a survival reflex. They are not looking for connection, they are looking for a mirror. Someone new appears, often rapidly, often too soon, accompanied by dramatic declarations of true love, real understanding, or the healthiest relationship yet. But these proclamations are not for the new person. They are for the fractured ego attempting to hold itself together. This stage reactivates the familiar cycle. intense affection, admiration, promises, and future projection. Yet, the rhythm has changed. Everything is faster, flatter, and emotionally hollow. The new person is not loved, they are used as a patch. And on some level, the narcissist knows this, even if they never admit it. The inner void does not disappear, it is merely postponed. And within this postponement, a silent process begins. Comparison. Not emotional comparison, but functional evaluation. Does the new person reflect quickly enough? Admire intensely enough? React predictably enough? And here, your image resurfaces not as an ex-partner, but as an unconscious benchmark. Small fragments return. How you remained silent without collapsing. How you were not easily manipulated. How you saw through the mask yet stayed until you could not anymore. The new person may be more compliant, easier to control, but they do not generate the same sense of being fully mirrored. This unsettles the narcissist. They begin to accelerate the performance-pushing commitment, broadcasting intimacy, declaring devotion publicly. These are not signs of happiness. They are desperate attempts to convince themselves that replacement has worked. But the more they perform, the clearer the emptiness becomes. And from this emptiness emerges the most dangerous aspect of stage 3. Quiet obsession. No more overt rage, no direct attacks. Just silent monitoring, checking how you live, whether you react, whether you still orbit their influence. They observe not out of love, but out of necessity. If you suffer, they are soothed. If you remain silent and grounded, they are destabilized. Because that suggests an intolerable reality. You have truly exited their gravitational field. And in the quietest moments when the new person sleeps beside them, when the lights go out, when no audience remains, the narcissist confronts a bitter truth. No one can replace the role you once held, not because you were perfect, but because you were real. And reality, once lost, cannot be replicated. And when layers of replacement no longer conceal the void, when performance loses its audience, and tests no longer provoke reaction, a slow yet decisive shift occurs from the outside inward, from noise into stillness. Stage 4, the silent collapse. This is not a dramatic breakdown, not marked by public tears or desperate pleas. It is an erosion of the ego that happens quietly, as every strategy that once sustained the false self loses effectiveness. In this stage, the narcissist no longer has the energy to rage, nor the illusion to self-soothe. What remains is exhaustion. Exhaustion from maintaining a fabricated identity without a reliable source of reflection. Exhaustion from waking each day to a heavier mask and diminishing motivation to wear it. Emotional emptiness surfaces, a nameless hollowness with no clear cause, untouched by work, sex, achievement, or attention. For a healthy person, emptiness invites inward exploration. For a narcissist, it threatens existence itself, because there was never a stable inner world to inhabit. Without you, the mirror that once gave them a sense of being, they begin to feel like a shadow moving through their own life. Activities that once stimulated now feel dull. Praise that once energized now slides off without impact. They can still smile, post photos, perform socially, but something in their eyes has dimmed. Not sadness as most people know it, but depletion. Depleted emotional energy, depleted capacity for connection, depleted meaning. And within this depletion, an existential crisis emerges, unnamed, yet pervasive. Questions they long avoided knock softly. Who am I without admiration? What am I without reaction? Lacking inner language to confront these questions, they do not reflect, they freeze. This state is often mistaken for calm or maturity. In truth, it is withdrawal due to overload. They reduce contact not to heal, but because there is nothing left to perform. They avoid not out of insight, but out of fear of facing the void. Some overwork, believing intensity can replace depth. Others sink into addiction, alcohol, partying, casual sex, seeking sensation strong enough to numb the paralysis. But the more they flee, the tighter the emptiness clings. And in the quietest moments when there is no one to impress, no one to control, memories of you surface without drama or romance. They appear as contrast. You once saw them without requiring spectacle. You remained present without needing their performance. You went silent not to punish, but to protect yourself. That memory is unsettling because it suggests an intolerable possibility. There may have been another path, one requiring truth instead of control. At this stage, they no longer actively attack or attempt to pull you back. They either monitor quietly or disappear. Both signal the same reality. The old system has run out of power, and when no supply can sustain the false self, collapse does not arrive as an explosion, but as prolonged silence. This silence brings no peace. It brings fatigue, the sensation of existing without truly living. And whether they name it or not, an existential crisis has begun, forcing a fundamental question they can no longer avoid: perform to survive or become real to live. And when the silent collapse no longer sustains them, when emptiness becomes a permanent condition rather than a passing state, a new movement begins to form, not awakening, but a desperate attempt to flee the void itself. Stage 5: Loop reenactment, desperate search for replacement. At this stage, the narcissist no longer acts from a sense of power, but from raw fear, the fear of being alone with themselves, the fear of existing without reflection. Replacement is no longer a confident strategy, it is a survival reflex. They rush into new connections, not out of desire for intimacy, but out of the need to anesthetize the inner emptiness. New partners appear faster. Commitments accelerate sooner. Emotional milestones are pushed prematurely, not because love is deeper, but because time feels threatening. Yet this reenactment carries a crucial difference. It lacks vitality. Compliments still come, but they are hollow. Romantic gestures persist, but they do not land. The narcissist is replaying an old script with depleted energy. And inevitably, comparison begins, not because they still love you, but because you have become an unconscious benchmark for what cannot be replicated. The new person may be more compliant, easier to control, but they do not reflect the depth you once brought. This creates a quiet obsession. Memories of you surface not as longing, but as evidence of something lost they cannot name. This obsession does not lead them toward truth, it accelerates the loop. Performances intensify, social media grows louder, happiness is curated more carefully, declarations become grander. Yet every display now carries the scent of desperation. The harder they try to prove they are fine, the more they expose that they are not. Inside, the emptiness spreads. As the replacement loses its numbing effect, emotional fatigue sets in. Boredom, irritability, contempt, investment fades, habit takes over. And in this phase, they may circle back to the ghost of you, not to apologize, not to repair, but to test whether the old mirror still works. A distant glance, an indirect interaction, a vague message. Not because they want you, but because they want the feeling they once had around you. If the mirror does not reflect, if you no longer respond, this loop begins to fracture internally. Desperation intensifies, setting the stage for what comes next, a phase where escape through replacement is no longer possible. Stage 6. Facing the true self, or complete disintegration. This is the stage where the story no longer needs to revolve around the narcissist. Not because they are doing better, and certainly not because they have paid the price, but because they no longer occupy the center of your psychological life. On their side, once every strategy has failed, rage no longer pulls you back, replacement no longer fills the void, manipulation no longer works, the false self loses its ability to hold together. At this point, the narcissist is forced to confront a reality they have avoided their entire life. There is no one left to reflect them. From here, only two outcomes remain. The first, extremely rare, is facing the true self. This is not a romantic awakening or a dramatic moment of remorse. It is a deep identity crisis, where they begin to see that their sense of worth, control, and selfhood has always depended on other people's reactions. This state comes with shame, confusion, disorientation, and an unbearable inner emptiness. Only those capable of real inner responsibility can remain in this space without escaping it. They seek therapy, accept accountability, and learn how to exist without manipulation. In reality, very few ever take this path. The second and far more common outcome is complete disintegration in silence. Not a dramatic collapse, but a slow erosion. The narcissist continues cycling through relationships, but with increasing emptiness, emotional numbness, and exhaustion. Behavior becomes habitual: charm, control, boredom, discard, not because they become worse, but because there is nothing left inside to genuinely invest in others. The false self remains, but as a hollow structure operating on momentum rather than meaning. However, the most important part of this stage is not which path they choose. The critical point is this: you are no longer inside their system. In stage 6, you are no longer watching, waiting, analyzing, or hoping. You no longer need answers from them to close the story. You understand through lived experience, not theory, that someone incapable of real connection cannot offer healthy closure. Your psychological liberation happens when you realize you do not need them to understand, you do not need them to regret, you do not need them to collapse in order to live fully and freely. You begin reclaiming the energy that was once drained by explaining, enduring, doubting yourself, and trying to make things work. You see clearly that you were carrying a role that was never yours, stabilizing someone else's psyche at the cost of your own. When you put that role down, the world does not fall apart, you become lighter. At this stage, the narcissist may still exist somewhere in memory, but they no longer have emotional access. You are no longer reactive, no longer triggered, no longer compelled to prove you were right or they were wrong. You do not need to win the story because you have stepped outside of it. Boundaries here are no longer something you must actively enforce. They become a natural state. Your silence is no longer a tactic, no longer self-protection, no longer a way to affect them. It is simply the result of no longer sharing the same psychological reality. And that is the clearest sign of freedom. Stage 6 does not deliver a dramatic climax. It delivers depth. There is no explosion, only the gradual stabilization of your nervous system, your self-respect, and your inner sense of safety. You are no longer constantly alert. You no longer read people to survive. You no longer anticipate moods to protect yourself. The story ends not because they changed, but because you changed position. You are no longer trapped inside the maze searching for an exit. You have stepped outside, and the maze no longer defines your reality. From here on, whether the narcissist faces their true self or fully disintegrates, is their journey no longer your responsibility, your task, or your burden. Your story begins again here. Without explanation, without justification, without closure from the one who caused the wound. Only one thing remains. Keep walking forward without turning back to check what became of them. After everything you've just heard, one truth may now be becoming unmistakably clear. The most painful part of being in a relationship with a narcissist is not when they leave, nor even how they treated you. It is the time you lost trying to understand, save, and hold on to someone who was never truly present. The 6 stages we've walked through are not meant to satisfy curiosity about their collapse. They exist to help you understand why leaving was necessary, why your silence is not avoidance, and why you do not need an apology or awakening from them in order to move forward. A narcissist may deny, rage, replace, perform, and eventually hollow out or remain trapped in their own endless loop. But none of that is your story anymore. The moment you stop reacting, stop seeking explanations, and stop looking back to see whether they finally understand, is the moment you step out of a system that held you far longer than it ever should have. You didn't leave because you were weak. You left because you became aware. You didn't choose silence to punish them. You chose it because you no longer agreed to be the mirror for a false self. And perhaps, in a very human moment, you still wonder, do they feel pain? Do they regret it? But by now, you can answer this for yourself. Those questions no longer matter. Not because they are unworthy of care, but because you learned that your peace cannot be placed in the hands of someone who caused your wounds. If you are still in a relationship with a narcissist, or if you've just walked away, Remember this, you are not obligated to stay and wait for them to change. You do not need to remain present for their realization. And you owe them no explanation for choosing yourself. Your healing is quiet. Your freedom does not require proof. And your true strength is not found in their collapse, it is found in the fact that you are no longer there to be pulled into it. Keep walking forward, without turning back, not because you despise the past, but because you have outgrown it.